Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. I'm your host, Blythe Brumleve, and I'm happy to welcome in Guru Rao. He is the CEO and founder of nuVizz, and we're going to be talking about the evolution of last mile, the expectations on the customer side of things, and how software is helping to fill those needs. So, Guru, welcome into the show.
Thanks, Blythe. Appreciate. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now you started nuVizz more than a decade ago, and so I'm excited to talk about the last mile and technology aspect side of things. But before you started nuVizz, you actually had a very lengthy career in logistics, and so for folks who may not be aware of your career journey, can you give us a sense of your background and your very first job in logistics?
Oh, absolutely. I've spent almost 30 years now. I'm dating myself. I tell people jokingly that I started my first career job, when I was 10. But yeah, it's been 30 years. We started in supply chain, 90s, in the mid 90s, right? As when technology, I mean, it's still, we are living in the same space, a similar area, but technology was still in nascent stage in supply chain. We helped build, started in the technology space within the supply chain, broader supply chain, coming out of college as a trained software engineer. And I didn't, program for too long. I was too lazy for that. And but got fascinated with the supply chain space. But being involved in product building, business building, helping customers in every aspect of supply chain in many different verticals across the globe, right? Seeing firsthand the challenges and fascinating things that happen within the supply chain, and it kept us in this space. And with with that background and understanding, firsthand understanding of the space, about 10 years ago, when we were looking at how can we leverage the experience that we have and the technology background to solve some real problems in the industry. And we saw a great opportunity where especially in the supply chain, the technology was limited to within the four walls, and we saw the transportation and logistics moving into more of a network based ecosystem, right? That was kind of the problem and the opportunity for us to bring newer technologies into the space. And that is how nuVizz started in 2011, and we've been at it since then.
And so you mentioned that you started your first job as a carrier at age of 10. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
No, just
Okay.
no,
I was like, oh wow. If you, I mean, I guess you can always sort of tie anything back to
no, yeah,
logistics,
I was
especially if you're
just
young.
yeah. My first job as out of the college was in the logistics technology space. It was building inventory management for a slaughterhouse. That was a fascinating. That's how got involved in inventory management of all things. Slaughterhouse, right? But that was where I started my career.
Yeah, that's an entire other set of logistics issues that you're probably dealing with versus in the software space. Different messes to clean up, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So when you are, what did the landscape for last mile software look like when you first started nuVizz? Was it kind of non-existent, or were you guys, really like pioneers in that regard?
Oh, that is a great question. Today, everybody talk about last mile technology, delivery management and experience and all that. 10 years ago, when we started, the whole technology space called last mile technology did not exist, right? So that's a good way to think about why we started this, right? Going back to my earlier talk about supply chain was very one dimensional, very point to point, limited partners, right? That's how supply chains work. The logistics transportation was limited partners, point to point integration and all that. And then around after the cell phone smartphone era, right, the whole world started to become a more of a network, right? And slowly shippers started to divest away from the private fleet, started to work with more and more partners. That started happening. And at the same time, e-commerce came in, right? As e-commerce exploded, everybody started delivering everywhere. So when that happened, No shipper was big enough to be able to have their own fleet to go and deliver to all their customers. So invariably they had to rely on multiple carrier partners, right? So when that happened, the existing technology integration, everything broke down, right? When you were working with one or two partners, it was okay to move data back and forth. But when you're working with hundreds of partners, that in itself will become a huge endeavor if I have to do that 100 times over, right? And one, I cannot do it. Two, it's prone to errors. And three, more importantly, it cannot be real time, right?
Hmm.
So that is what we saw that when we talk about network ecosystem, right? That was one part of the problem. The the solution to that was twofold. One, there were technologies that can intelligently manage this data without having to take it from point A to point B. And two, mobile technology that came in around 2005, 6, 7, right, enabled enterprises to be connected when working with completely disconnected entities, right? So, for example, if you look at it in the last mile, it's one of the core aspects of any shipper today, right? That's a very important part for them because that is where you touch your end customer. That's where customer experience comes into play. But ironically, 99% of the shippers are not touching their end customers because they are working with some third party partners. So that is the big disconnect, right? And of course, we can talk about the customer expectations and same day delivery, 2 hour delivery, and all that, how it changed the whole logistics and delivery business. But that added a completely different aspect on the shipper side. Generally, historically, shippers always looked at last mile delivery as somebody will do it for us,
Hmm.
right? And then they'll tell us how it happened after the fact, and they were okay with that. But now every company is now in the middle of, I like to say, every company under the sun now suddenly has become a delivery company, right? They're delivering services, goods, or what have you. And the customer, they're right in the middle of the customer experience. And the only way to be able to connect it to your end customer without having to invest in assets and running your own logistics business is technology, right? So that's what we saw 10 years ago. And we did not think about this as a last mile problem,
Hmm.
right? We thought about it as a logistics problem, right? Whatever, it doesn't matter. Middle mile, again, that's another misnomer, right? When people talk about last mile, they always think about the final, ringing the bell kind of delivery scenario. But for that to happen, there are four other things that need to happen in a connected way to make that last mile happen, right? So we thought about this network holistically, and to create a technology that can enable that without having to create a whole integration nightmare, right? That's kind of the thing we started in 2011, building that platform, right? Basically, the problem statement we started with was, I'm moving something from point A to point B, and there are multiple stakeholders involved in that move. And how can I orchestrate that move and keep every stakeholder involved in that with real time, providing them context sensitive visibility with real time data, right? That was kind of the very abstract problem statement. There is no last mile in that anywhere, right? So, and that was kind of where we started. And of course, in the last 5 years, the whole space has completely transformed with so much talk about last mile and different areas of technologies catering to the challenges that we today. And absolutely, it's been a great journey for us, and we've really got a leg up in terms of how we thought about the problem. And the way we thought about the problem made us really very stable, very secure, very scalable today as a platform and as technology.
And so it sounds like, the same problems that existed, 10 years ago, 11 years ago when you started the company still exists today. The carrier partnerships, the everything is kind of in its own data silo, and even with technology coming into the mix over the last handful of years, it still sounds like you're still trying to solve those core problems. Is that a safe assumption?
Absolutely, you are absolutely right. At the end of the day, if you look at it, like I said, something is going from point A to point B, and multiple folks are touching that. That is still happening. That was happening, right? 10 years ago, 20 years ago, same thing is happening today. But the magnitude of what is happening today is 10 times bigger in magnitude than it what was happening 10 years ago, right? In terms of number of partners involved, in terms of number of touches it goes through, and all of that. And that is one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is the lead time expectations have come down drastically, right? Nobody is now talking about days. Everybody is talking about minutes and hours if you're lucky, right? So those are kind of the levers that kind of change the whole landscape of technology, right? And then traditionally, the whole space has been completely fragmented from a transportation, which still is, which is going to be, right? There is no one party that can come in and say, I'm going to bring in national level coverage with my own assets. That is never going to happen, right?
Hmm.
So when the fragmentation is just becoming big, worse and worse, and so but shippers want to get in the middle of that experience. So how do they do that? That's where the technology is really making a big difference in how people can handle this new expectations in the new ecosystem.
And I'm so glad you mentioned expectations, because that leads into my next question of, I know that, for a very large customer, or I guess market for nuVizz is the pharmaceutical industry. And so when you think about the last mile, who I guess is the most demanding, or what segment is the most demanding when it comes to those expectations? I imagine pharmaceuticals is right up there, just because of the need of the end user, of the customer that's getting that end shipment. But what about, are there any other, maybe, CPG companies or anything else that where last mile is more important than, say, the majority of the other companies that are concerned with last mile?
It's a great point again. The beauty of the technology that we built and we talked about, we never constrained ourselves with any industry or vertical specific talk. We never said in our problem that I'm moving a carton, I'm moving a pallet, I'm moving XYZ. I said something is going from point A to point B, right? So when you start with that, just by the definition of itself, I can take the solution to pharma, I can take it to CPG, I can take it to auto parts, I can take it to food distribution, because each one of them is very similar. At the same time, they have their own nuances, right? Think of it, right? There's 80/20 rule in any conversation. 80% of what they do, they bring it in, say, store it, get the order, load it, go and deliver. That happens with any logistics business, right? But that it doesn't stop there. The 20% what you apply on top of it, which are the nuances that are specific to each of the industry verticals, is where you really get stuck, right? Because that's where the challenge is. And so to answer your point, every vertical has its challenges, and the platform also is built with that idea that, again, 80% is standard, and then give me the flexibility to do the 20% depending on how I want to do my business. Like, let's talk about two different aspects, right? One is from the shipper standpoint. If you are a shipper, you are obviously, 90% of the time you're only focused on one vertical, right? You are either a pharma, CPG, or what have you. That's what you specialize in. So you have the challenges there. But if you talk about the carrier, that's a completely different story.
Hmm.
No, 99% of the carriers are working today with many different types of shippers across different verticals, right? They're filling their truck with pharma products, they're filling with auto parts, they're filling with food parts, food inventory, everything on a single truck, and they're operating in a commingled environment. So think, if pharma customer has to deal with the pharma nuances, a true commingled carrier has to deal with all the nuances for all types of different shippers that they work with, right? That is an even more challenging environment that they live in, right? So that is where the technology comes into play. For us, we have seen pharma is definitely a big, again, when we talk about healthcare, we talk about pharma as part of the broader healthcare. there's multiple things going on. Like there is distribution, pharma distributors that bring in product from the manufacturers, or bring it to the Walgreens and CVS and all that. For them, that is their end mile, right? So then, that's their customers, that is their end mile. So there is a whole set of nuances in terms of chain of custody and tracking every product, right? And there is data security, HIPAA, all of that comes into play. And then the other aspect of that is home prescription delivery, which is growing in a big way. How do you manage that, which is another layer of it. Within the healthcare, there is another logistics business that manages all the lab logistics, bringing product from the labs to the hospitals and vice versa and all that. So all of these are part of the healthcare, transportation logistics holistically when you look at it. And your technology, can your technology cater to all that, right? That's kind of how we looked at solving the problem, but not from a pure niche kind of thinking, saying, okay, I'm going to provide delivery tracking solution for moving furnitures, for example. That would have been a much easier problem to solve, right? Because it's very contained, and I have boundaries around what I need to really enable the platform to do.
And so, with all of the intricacies within shipping just a single product, no matter where it lands, and with all the technology coming into it, how do you manage the unexpected in shipping with technology? Is it just a constant feedback loop that you're in with your customers and your carriers? How do you manage that from a coding perspective?
Again, that's a great question. Again, if you look at it's also going back to technology evolution. So when we started 20, 25 years ago, it was all about creating efficiencies, right? How can I make things better, right? Look at automating processes, so that way I'm not doing the same thing over and over and over again 1,000 times. I can automate it and get efficiency, so I can take out that labor, take out the resources from there, and put them into more value added services. That was the mentality, right? And as things progress, as we are dealing with more and more, the exception management by exception became the mantra, right?
Hmm.
Most of the standard things should flow seamlessly, and we need to put resources only to look at exceptions, right? So give me all the reds on the map, so I can go dig deeper and see what's going on, and that's where I'm spending most of my time, kind of mentality, right?
Hmm.
So now we are at the next evolution of the technology, where technology is smart enough to hand look at those exceptions and automatically route that back into your thing. What I call self learning and self healing technologies, right? That's where we are in the evolution of technology. So I don't really need to be sitting and watching my monitor to see where is the red dot and go and see what I need to do now. Systems are capable to understand that and reroute it through the proper channels, so handling also comes down, right? That is the evolution we are in today in terms of technology. I mean, when I talk about technology and different, of course, every customer is at a different it's a spectrum, right?
Hmm.
There are different places, but generally speaking, that is where the technology is headed, right? That is where we are today, and we see that with our customers every day. Some customers are starting phase one, and some customers are starting to scratch the next evolution of technology. So they are at different places, and we meet them where they are. I mean, that is the nature of technology or doing any business.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head on meeting them where they are, because the last few years, I mean, I don't have to tell anybody that it's just been a crazy pendulum swing, just back and forth of expectations and demand and what's going on within the market. So I'm curious of what your customers' expectations now are of your technology in the quote unquote post COVID world. Are they relying more and more on technology, or are they wanting to focus more on consolidating a lot of their tools that they're using?
I mean, absolutely. I think in the last 5 years, the logistics supply chain has been the space to be in, and more has happened in the 5 years than what I ever saw in the 20 years before that,
Hmm.
right?
Oh well.
So again, from the customer standpoint as well, of course, supply chain logistics has always been looked on as a cost center, right? So you got to have it to do the business. So as lean you can be, that's how you measure your success. So that's how it was. And so technology was always an afterthought. Only if it's going to save me cost, in real cost, I'm going to look at it. But it takes me $10 to implement it. I'm not going to look at it because that $10 is more than what I'm spending today, kind of a mentality, right? So that has completely changed, again, because you're starting to deal with more and more variables, right? It's humanly impossible to deal all of that manually and still be able to provide the expectations that your customers are placing on you. So the technology has become a must have. That's where everybody starts today, right? Nobody starts thinking about a logistics business without thinking about technology today, which was not the case 5-10 years ago, right? The first thing I need is my trucks and drivers and contracts and whatnot. And if required, let's think about technology, right? Worst case, I'm going to put a GPS on my truck and I know where my drivers are. That is my level one, phase one of technology evolution. If that doesn't work, and if my shippers demand something more, then I'll do more, right? It was always driven by that nothing, not proactively. So today, I never have to have this conversation and tell somebody, hey, this is what we do, and they will never say, no, I'm not interested, right? That never happens, right? They're always curious about, hey, what are you doing? How can I get better? What are the new things, right? That's why I say it's a great place to be in. We're not selling widgets anymore. We are selling active conversations. People are really interested in investing time and money, right? So that's the biggest change I have seen in terms of how technology is being viewed. And people understand that they cannot run their businesses without the technology.
And speaking of this awareness level, there's also that general awareness, or not really awareness, but investment coming from some of these bigger brokerages that are starting to just buy up last mile fleets and operations through mergers, acquisitions. And so what does that, I guess, sort of hint at for the landscape of last mile? Do you see more last mile fleets being created, or do you see more brokerages just buying up those last mile fleets and that being their strategy?
I think it's going to coexist, both of them. But I see more of this consolidation happening because, like I said, people mistakenly thought of last mile as a very disconnected operations. I don't have to worry about everything else. All I need to do is take my product from one place to deliver, and I'm done, kind of a thing. And all of a sudden, you're starting to realize, to make that last mile happen, you got to connect so many other dots within your ecosystem, right? How can you make last mile better? If you can make all the other legs better. How can you make other legs better if you have control over all of those legs as a carrier by yourself? That's why we are seeing this run into buying up the last mile companies, all the brokers and freight forwarders and all of that. That's a natural extension for them, right?
Mm.
That's where a lot of business is. That's where a lot of investment is going. And you also have control over the other legs, right? So you can operate much better holistically, both from cost perspective as well as providing value perspective, right? So that is going to continue to happen. And we have talked to so many of those folks, brokers and forwarders, that have acquired last mile businesses and trying to integrate with that in their broader thing. Suddenly they've come to a standstill, realizing that their existing technologies cannot sustain, because they're all working as three separate, even though they have all the three parts they can do, but there are three still different companies. Again, I kind of uh, talk about this in the context of what happened in the retail business, from going from a single channel store, multi-channel, cross channel, and omni-channel, right? How that evolution happened. I'm seeing exactly the same thing happen in transportation, right?
Mm.
People thought, okay, I can do the line haul, then I'm not worried about in the LTL, then last mile. Everybody thought about them as completely different things. Now these big businesses, transportation companies, have all of them. They're all operating as independent entities. They got to create then cross channels between them, so that each of them will talk to each other. It's not going to stop there. They got to work as an omni transportation, if there is a word like that, right? So that is the only way they can make this whole holistic experience work better for both of their paying customers as well as the customers getting the products.
And with so many companies, though, they realize, I think, or maybe they're slow to realize the value of their own data, and so it's almost like we're at a place where they know the value of their data, but they still want to hold on so strong to it. So, how do you, as a company, convince customers and carriers and those folks to integrate their data with your platform? How do you sort of, I guess, ease their concerns?
Yeah, no, this is a great example. We deal with that. I think we are talking about seeing that less and less nowadays.
Hmm.
And when we started, even 5 years ago, when we started, especially the regulated industries like pharma, for example, they are very hesitant to have their data with anybody, right?
Hmm.
SaaS was a wrong, bad word for them. They thought by putting something in SaaS they're losing control, without realizing everybody is in some shape or form of SaaS, right?
Mm-hmm.
So so that was a big uh, you know challenge for us to tell people how it is safe and they can still operate it more efficient, right? That is the whole idea of this whole network economy that we talk about, network ecosystem. That is the only way we can make the world better, right? If we still continue to operate within the four walls mentality, then all of the what we are talking, that's why our platform, when we talked about, we consciously said this is going to be a only way of providing the solution, is going to be through a multi-tenant SaaS.
Hmm.
That means this is not going to be installed at any customer's on premise. That is dead. The moment I say on premise, I cannot build a network, right? It cannot be 10 different things sitting in 10 different places and trying to talk to each other via sharing data. We are back to where we were 10 years ago, and just using better computers and better whatever, it doesn't make us all better. So we have to think about a holistic approach of how the data, so data sharing is an important thing. And again, it doesn't have to, you don't have to share any of your secrets. It's all about shipment data going back and forth, instead of you calculating your lead time and telling to the next party, and next party doing the same thing, and all of that going back and forth. That is the platform. What we have is, it understands the stakeholders, same piece of information with all the stakeholders have visibility to that data, because it understands these are the only guys that have access to that,
Hmm.
right? Not everybody, right? Only those five stakeholders for that piece of information. And they also have what we call context sensitive visibility. Visibility is not for everybody, right? You as an end customer, you only care about when am I going to get my delivery. Am I going to get it at 2:30 which was promised or not? I don't care what else happened. That is my context. As a carrier, my context is, how where is my driver? Is he on time? Right? Have I filled his truck fully? Have I optimized his, all that? That is my context. For shipper, my context is, okay, what is my on time percentage? Is all my carriers doing on time, right? Or my customer satisfaction good or not? So there's different context, but they're all relying on different pieces of information to get that context, right? So if everybody just contributes their part of the data into the broader ecosystem, and the platform can create that context for different stakeholders without having to take that from point A to B to C, that is where the value is, right? This needs to happen not only within the verticals, right? We can talk more about the efficiency, sustainability, and all of that. It all starts from that,
Hmm.
right? So that I'm not redoing the same things that already someone has done it, right? And so that's kind of the whole change. And then when we talk to people, they understand it, and that's they are embracing it now. And everybody used to resist it before. It was always like people used to look at this as zero sum game, right? Yeah, if you do it, if you're telling me to do it, that means I'm losing something, versus somebody else is losing something. That is not the case. So we are all working to deliver something to the end customer, that means there's no harm in sharing that information across up, upstream and downstream partners, right? So that's what the technologies didn't exist 5-10 years ago. Then that was a genuine concern, right? But today we have the technologies. They are more secure, they are more smart, they are smarter than people can manage their data on Excel spreadsheet, definitely, right? So we should be, and companies are coming around, and large companies are, I mean, surprisingly, the larger companies are a lot more open to this idea, right, than the medium and smaller ones, right? That was a completely, against the common thought. You would think, okay, big companies would be hesitant and the smaller companies would be okay, right? That's kind of the one learning we had to go through. But I think it's no more a, let's put it that way, it's not a huge difficult task to convince anybody, even if they have those questions.
And I'm a little curious as to what the concerns would be from a small business perspective. Is it maybe the lack of, I guess, of a large maybe coworker base or employee base, and if you make the wrong tech investment, it could cost you your business? Are those the main concerns from the small business side versus the enterprise side?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go back, look at it, right, from a shipper standpoint, the whole last carrier mile business was a black hole, right?
Hmm.
They used to send them something via spreadsheet or whatever, and then at the end of the day, carrier, they would do whatever they're supposed to do, and at the end of the day, they go back and tell them, this is my performance. That's how carrier performance was measured. So when that is how it is measured, I'm always 100%. If I'm not 100%, you tell me and then we'll figure it out, right? That's kind of how it used to work. Now we are opening up this with the visibility. We are also opening up accountability,
Hmm.
right? So if everybody is looking at all the same piece of data, I don't need to tell the shipper that I'm doing a great job. They'll automatically know. And the reverse is also true. If I'm not doing a great job, then they'll know about that as well, right? So that is where the hesitancy is now. They think to some extent they are losing control, right? Where in the previous world, I would do whatever I want to do and then tell my shippers, "Hey, this is what happened," versus they're looking at my what I'm doing all the time and micromanaging or what have you, and they feel that they're losing control. And
Hmm.
they'll also know what else I am doing as a carrier, right? And that might give them some leverage in negotiations or contract negotiations or what have you. Those are all unfounded, by the way, right? Because the technology is smart enough to give them only they need to know, and they'll not know nothing about rest of the things you do, right? But you don't have to manually do that work, and you don't have to try to manipulate things and move things around and whatnot, right? So that's the hesitancy to some extent, right? But again, it's not hard to get around and make sure they understand what's going on, and then they come on board. And again, to my earlier point, they're also living in our environment where they're doing business with tens of shippers, if not hundreds, at the same time. Then they cannot do that manually anymore either, right? So so that it's a win-win for the whole ecosystem. But it needs a change in, like they say, old habits die last, right? They got to, but then we're all open to change, and that change is inevitable.
And I think too, with managing a lot of expectations, you get used to managing the same expectations, and then when new expectations are thrown in, and maybe a microscope is kind of put on your job and your performance, and you have to justify it, then you have to manage those expectations accordingly, and what contributed or led to that failure in that service. And so maybe that's a challenge, I think, for some of these smaller companies to evolve those expectations as they continue to stay in business. But I wanted to switch gears a little bit because I mentioned earlier before we started recording that I had listened to a couple of your interviews on Loaded and Rolling with Thomas Watson. Then there's also a Check Call with Mary O'Connell. And I heard you mention a few times about digital twin technology. And I kind of know about this from, sort of a high level overview, but I would love to hear you break down of what a digital twin is in logistics.
Yeah, no, again, that's a great question. again, it's the whole idea of the network. When we talk about the network, our most logistics supply chain ecosystems are pretty complex, right? If you look at take an example of large pharma distributor we're working with, right? They have about 35 distribution centers all across the country, and then they work with about 250 carrier cross dock locations, hubs, right? The products get shipped from their DC to the hub, and then the central hub may ship product to another hub, intermediary local hub, and then from there it gets delivered to the customer, right? Just look at the pharma distribution, one example. That's what we are talking about, the physical ecosystem that enables the movement of product from point A to point B to reach the end customer in this instance. So in the previously, what used to happen is every entity, every DC, every carrier terminal, every hub, every customer was a disconnected entity, right? From the DC, the data used to get created. It will get logged over to the carrier. Carrier will catch it. They will do whatever they do it. They'll send it to the next entity downstream, and that entity will do whatever. They'll then go and do the work. And then after the work happens, the same data traverses back all the way, leg after leg after leg. So that was kind of the world we lived in. So if you think about digital twin, creating a equal and similar entity within on the technology platform, similar to how the physical entities exist. So what I mean by that is you have these stakeholder entities, distribution center, central hub, local hub, customer. They all exist as entities within the technology, and also technology is smart enough to connect the dots to say this DC can ship to this location is shipping to this location. And when the data traverses through that, everybody gets to see that in real time. I'm creating a digital equivalent of what is physically happening. I'm not keeping them separate. The whole hierarchy, the relationships, all of that is pre existing in the twin world, technology world, so that the moving of data goes away completely, right? So that is a completely different way of thinking about technology, because 5-10 years ago, and even now, for the most part, all of the technology that we talk about and think about is limited to four walls,
Hmm.
right? My operations, and then after my operations is done, I'm going to send an EDI, or I'm going to do something to the next party, right? That is not a connected world. So the digital twin creates how physically things happen, how it should be. If something happens in the with my carrier right now, I should know exactly, sitting somewhere else as a shipper. I don't need to wait for the carrier to happen. That can only happen if they're all connected in this digital twin, with the understanding of the data and the ownership of the data, right? Who can see what they can see and all that, the relation, establishing those relationships, right? That's what we are trying to create a similar physical world in technology, so I can go and drop all those places and establish those connections. And by doing that, the platform understands how the data needs to flow, who needs to get to see the data, and what part of the data you know should be visible to which stakeholder and all that. So that takes out a lot of this mundane stuff that the logistics companies have been involved over the years, right? Investing in moving data, scrubbing data, rationalizing data, all of that goes away, right? And that adds a lot of value and efficiency that we have never thought about, and then positions us to get to the next level of what I was talking about, self learning and self healing systems.
And so when I guess when I saw, a few things about digital twins, it was more of, somebody where it was, for a full disclosure, it was a Facebook video. So it's, Mark Zuckerberg, talking
Yeah,
about,
and
people
it's
wearing the headsets, and that's the digital twin environment. We're going to have meetings in the metaverse, and,
oh,
or, and then there's other examples too, where I saw, one person was operating it was a farmland, and they were operating a drone using a headset in order to apply pesticides, or find crops that were ready to be picked and things like that. So that was the use case for a digital twin in that environment. But it sounds like from what you're saying is that it's more in logistics. It's being used more on the side of data infrastructures per location, so that there's an established hierarchy, I believe is what you said, for each location in the cloud environment. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Wish we could. We were in the metaverse where I can think about a product getting delivered to my house and it happened automatically. I mean, unfortunately, you still have to be involved
Like the
in the.
point of view inside the box, like you can just wear the headset and find out where exactly your shipment is.
Right. I mean, that the data exists. We can provide you that, but still, physical movement still needs to happen, right? So,
100%.
so
Well,
that's yeah.
let's get into a little bit of some of the next level of the self-healing of data in automation and AI. Where are some of, I guess, the most exciting things in automation and AI that you're seeing within logistics take hold?
Yeah, again, that's one of the areas that we, every day we think about how we can. There are, the chicken or egg conversation, right? So to, leverage machine learning, you got to have good data, right? That works on existing data. So the beauty of the platforms that we are talking about building is they're also, involved in the creation of the execution data, right? They're not relying on some third party created execution data. It is actually creating the data on the platform, so it is very reliable, right? That is first piece. One is reliable, two is real time,
Hmm.
right? It needs to be both. If it doesn't check off either one of those, then your data is waste, right? If I get great, reliable data 2 days later, it's useless, right? And the other way around as well. So getting the data, as we are involved in generating the data, and then bringing the data back into the system and let the machine learning algorithms understand the patterns, right? And so they can, when they see the exceptions, they can act on those exceptions automatically, inject them back into the plan, and so you don't need anybody else in the middle to do that mundane work, right? That mundane, we are extending the boundaries of what we call mundane slowly, right? Maybe it was somebody sitting and copying the Excel spreadsheet over and over and over again was mundane, right?
Good
Next
point.
level, dispatcher looking at the screen and trying to figure out who is the best driver, maybe that was mundane. And now we are extending that, right? If I know, the system knows I have 10 drivers in the field, and what is on their truck, where exactly they are right now, are they running late or are they on time, all of that information is available with the system. And if an exception happens, I need to find a driver to do this particular job within the next 30 minutes, right? System should be able to make that intelligent decision without anybody pressing a button,
Hmm.
right? So that is kind of one example of simple way of looking at it, right? Today you spend hours and hours of dispatchers time talking to the drivers, talking to the carrier, hey, where are you, can you do this, what have you. So all of that can happen in a matter of milliseconds with the system, with all of that knowledge. But to be able to do that, the two primary criteria, like I said, real time data and reliable data, right? Those are key. Otherwise, if if the data is bad, whatever machine learning comes back and says, obviously the output is going to be bad. The driver
Hmm.
may not be at the location where the system thought he was supposed to be, right? So that's why it's an evolution. I cannot start using machine learning without even having reliable data. So I need to focus on getting to that place, which is where most of the companies today, right? They are made again, in over the spectrum there are different places, and that's where you need to start. Find a place where you can collect all the data and ensure that it's reliable, it is rationalized, right? It's one, right? You're not getting data in 10 different ways and you got to put them in different formats or what have you. Work on that, and that is the phase one. And once you have that, you have a lot of value you can create through these machine learning and other abilities, right? So that's kind of where, that's why, chicken or egg I was talking about, right? So that's kind of the evolution. And we as a technology provider, we are at the phase 3 of that evolution, and some of our customers may be phase 1, phase 2, and they're catching on to phase 3. But we'll be always ahead of them in terms of, where when they are ready to embrace those technologies.
And so, say I'm a company and all of this, sounds great, and I want to start, sort of implementing into a phase one or a phase two. So, but to start with that phase one, making sure your data is clean, is that something that you can realistically do inside of your own company, maybe with an executive team, a CTO, or is that something that you really need to rely on a partner in order to help you figure out if your data is good or not?
Again, it's a collective effort, right? I mean, most of the things that we are talking about, you can do as an organization within, but to understand the technologies that can help you do that, right, and the best practices how to do that, you probably would need partners to engage in that, right? But one of the good things about this technology that we are talking about versus the technologies that we were implementing 15, 20 years ago, like WMSs and TMSs and all that, which used to take months, if not years. We've all been there, people talking about 18-month, 24-month implementations and all that.
Terrible.
We are nowhere there. We are way far ahead in terms of implementations with these
Mm.
technologies that, right, we are talking about weeks,
Oh, wow.
if not months, if if you stretch that. So when, if that is the case, it gives you a lot of solace in trying to think about this, and it's not, you're not spending 16 months of your lifetime to figure out whether it's going to work or not, right? That is not at all the case, right? So because these technologies are standard out of, technologies out there, like smartphone technologies, and you don't need to have, special hardware and, whatever, these are all SaaS technologies, right? You're not installing and maintaining and any of that. So there's all of that is taken care for you. So it's going to be, you're going to get to realization of the value pretty faster than what we were used to, 3, 4, 5, 10 years ago, right? So that's why, that's one of the other reasons people think a lot, confident about embracing these technologies, right? And plus, of course, the SaaS also gives them the how they pay for it as well, right? They're not paying $1 million license on day one without hoping that it would work one day, right? And you are paying for use, and you're getting there to use much faster in like I said, in matter of weeks. So there are lots of things going for these technologies for our customers.
And so for a lot of your customers, I imagine that they get onboarded very quickly and then they can start, really sort of business planning for the year out once they can get an accurate look at what their data is telling them. But then how do you, I guess, sort of adjust the conversation for these newer technologies? I say newer, autonomous vehicles, drones, things like that are coming into the last mile delivery market. How can they use, those that data that they have now and use it also, or analyze, maybe they'll use it in the future with some of these newer technologies coming into the mix?
Yeah. So yeah, that's again great point. These are all technologies that will be coming in the near future, whatever that near future, quote unquote, right, happens to be. But they're all in different phases of their, most of them are in pilot stages or what have you. Commercially viable products are going to be available, in few years. But from a technology standpoint, the way, again, the platforms have to be designed that any mode of transportation, right, the technology that works for your trucks, the technology that works for people today, should also be able to work with your autonomous vehicles, right? In terms of communicating with that, you still need to plan your routes, you still need to dispatch your routes, except that you are dispatching it to a, quote unquote, a smartphone, which is what is happening today. But a driver is looking at that smartphone and making decisions. But you think about AVs, it's the same thing. You just take out the driver. Of course, I'm not saying the intricacies of the AV itself is a completely different thing, but from a
Sure.
delivery technology standpoint, we are talking about the same thing, right? So that's how the technologies should be designed and thought about. So you're not going, and again, when you want to venture into that, you don't have to think about ripping apart what you have and starting to think about a brand new technology, right? So that is kind of how we think about it, right? We think about those technology, we don't think of them as something that we have to start building for it, right? It's kind of there. When they are become available, we can plug into them our drones. We have done, some kind of pilots with all of these technologies like avs, drone deliveries and all that. We can prove that the same existing technologies that work with your vehicles and trucks can work with those as well, whenever those technologies are ready to be deployed in the field.
And it sounds like the more of a need for the autonomous vehicles and for the drones to have a need for that strong data set versus the I guess a role reversal in that regard, where drones and AVs will probably complement the industry in the coming years. I think it's still a little ways off for that becomes commonplace, and but it sounds like they would need this data set a lot sooner than the flip side would need them, if that's a safe
Yeah,
assumption.
absolutely.
And so, as we kind of round out this discussion and come to the last sort of couple questions, I always like to ask the magic wand question. If I could give you a magic wand and you could fix last mile, what would be the biggest problems that you would fix?
um, I'll keep my magic one more, less expectations, right? uh, I don't ask for the world, but I think one of the things that in the whole supply chain logistics as a whole, we have been very late to come with standards, right? As an industry, it always was forced upon us. And even today we are sitting here and talking about edi as the greatest invention. I mean, it was great, don't get me wrong, but we should have been talking about 10 different things since that happened, right? Unfortunately, we don't have those 10 different things to talk about. So that's one thing. Before it gets too out of hand, we have, as an industry, we got to come together to create standardization within, especially the last mile, which is a wild west today, right? Which is very fragmented, and everybody does their things in own ways, and there's no way to figure out, any from any standpoint, from pricing, from execution, from whatever lead times and any of those. So that is one thing that we'll have to, as an industry, if we do that, then all the technologies and everything else that we come up with can complement those and can operate in a much better place. Instead, doing tech, we have technologies but you still don't have standards, then it again becomes a question of putting in extra additional work to make up for that lack of standards, right? So that is where I think we would, because we know now the delivery expectations are not going to go away, right? Just because we're out of the pandemic, which we are hopefully, right? It's not going to go away. It's only going to get more and more acute. And now I think it's time for us to think as an industry and come up with standards, so then everybody can operate on those standards without having to create their own silos. So that would be my hope, right? And and as technology vendors, we get involved in some of those initiatives, but also it needs a broader industry participation and contribution into that.
Absolutely. Very well said. And for folks who want to follow along with the nuVizz journey, maybe become a customer or follow along with you and your work and your, talks and interviews, where can folks follow your work and nuVizz?
Sure. nuVizz, it's at nuvizz.com. You can always find us there for latest and greatest. And info@nuVizz.com if you want to get in touch with us. We'll be more than happy to connect with you and talk. I'm on LinkedIn all the time and want to engage, allowed to have conversations with the folks. So you can find me there all the time.
100%. And I will make sure that I link to both of those in the show notes just to make it easy for folks. But Guru, this was a fascinating conversation, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Blythe. Appreciate it. Thanks for the time.